So today I'm starting a quick little project. Got my shop kind of jammed up right now. Back up and get this in the picture here. So I'm gonna do some work on this here Jeep. So this is my dad's Jeep. It's an 81 CJ-7. He's owned this for about 30 years, close to it. Trying to think off the top of my head when he bought this. I think about 1993. It was basically 100% stock. It had the Iron Puke 4-cylinder in it. It's a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder, makes about 75 horsepower is what it had in it. 4-speed transmission. Dana 300 transfer case, AMC 20 axle in the back, Dana 30 in the front. So as far as the drivetrain goes, the axles are still original. The transfer case is original. So now it's got a Chevy, I believe it's a 2007 off the top of my head. Chevy 4.3 V6. This one came out of a half-ton pickup. And then it's got an AX15 5-speed. I don't remember what that came out of. Probably a Cherokee or something. I feel like I've forgotten. I've never been a Jeep guy as far as owning a Jeep myself or anything like that. But, you know, I worked in the four-wheel drive and off-road world for quite a while, and, you know, I knew a ton about these things during that time just from doing the work. Like I said, it's got an AX15. Still got the Dana 300 transfer case. Stock, I believe the axles were 373s. No, they were 410s. Actually, I don't remember 100%. I think they were 410s. I could be wrong. So now it's got 456s in it, you know, because originally had 31s. These are 33s. So he re-geared it, 456s. It's got ARB air lockers, front and rear. Suspension-wise, it's got, I believe they're Pro Comp 2.5-inch leaves. And then to get a little more height out of the back, it's got some extended shackles. They're probably like a 1-inch lift. And then the front has got a shackle reverse. And again, it's got a little bit longer shackles than the kit came with. But the shackle reverse is kind of cool because it came from a company that was my very first job out of school. There's a company, they're still around, it's called Warrior Products. It's kind of hard to tell, it's been fairly modified with the bumper and stuff, but basically it came with a cross member in the front that bolted into place using the holes from the original shackle hanger. And so it moved the fixed end. So basically, if you don't know, a shackle reverse means basically the leaf spring shackle used to be under the front bumper, and now it's been reversed to the other side of the spring, the back side. Couple benefits. They generally ride a little better because now the fixed end is here, and so your leaf spring acts kind of as a trailing arm and pulls the front axle over bumps instead of being pushed from the other end. Generally speaking, you get more caster, and that's where most of the benefits come from. Basically, at this point, to keep the ride height the same, you need more room at the back for a shackle. So the spring eye gets pushed down, and to keep the ride height the same, this end goes up, so that in the center, it stays roughly the same. This kit, I believe, gave you a 1-inch lift, but still it adds probably 3, 4, 5 degrees of caster, which for most off-road trucks, especially early ones, that's something that really helps out. Adding some caster to them just makes them want to go down the road straight. Gives a little better feel going through the corners, and just generally helps everything with, in my opinion, no drawbacks. I don't know why so many rigs come with so little caster. Generally, when you look at 4x4 trucks, they're usually in the 3.5 degree range. Plus minus a little bit, but generally in the 3 to 4, we'll say 3 to 4 degree range. And I don't understand why. It's not enough, I don't think. This guy is running 6 degrees and it drives a million times better. You do lose a tiny bit of turning radius, but totally worth it. I don't know what this one is sitting at now. I would guess it's 6+ degrees, but it drives so good. It just goes down the road straight. You can hold the wheel like this with your hand sitting on your leg, and it just goes straight. Doesn't dart around. So big benefit. So the cool thing was, getting back to the beginning of the story here, I was able to get him this kit, because I worked there, and that was really my first job out of school, and that's where I learned a ton at that job. We built a lot of different Jeep accessories there, and learned how to run different kinds of equipment. Learned how to build fixtures for welding and just all kinds of cool stuff. So back to the Jeep. Him and I built this bumper probably 20+ years ago. It's got a 10,000-pound Ramsey winch. Back then it had some old school like 4x6 KC lights or some other brand of lights, but they died, and he switched them out to some LEDs. He did all the work on this thing, really. The engine swap, the gears, the ARB lockers, all that stuff. He's a mechanic, or before he retired, he was a mechanic. Generally like diesel and heavy equipment, but he's pretty much a jack of all trades. So what I'm doing, he's recently moved into a new house and is busy with that kind of stuff. And so the electric fan controller crapped out. So I'm gonna replace that. It's gonna take a little bit of rewiring and stuff like that, but new fan controller. And then a while back, it's hard to see because it's dark, he put in some, again, these are FOA brand, but some 2-inch smooth body shocks. And they're just how the valving came out of the box. And it could definitely ride better. For a Jeep, for an older Jeep, I think it rides pretty darn good, but there's definitely room for improvement. I'm probably not going to touch the fronts. They feel pretty good to me. I'm going to start with the back. So I'm going to pull the shocks off and pull them apart and do a little work to the valving. And go from there. If I get it softened up a little in the back and it feels good, then we'll leave it. And sometimes you'll fix one end and it's like, wow, this end really sucks now. So we'll see how it goes. I may have to do that. But that's really it for this thing. Just those two jobs. It's a pretty nice Jeep for its age, and it's cool. It's cool. It's still on the road. You just hardly see any of these older Jeeps anymore. It's pretty clean. It's from California originally, so it's it doesn't really have any rust issues. And it's a far cry from where it was when you first bought it. It was with that Iron Duke 4-cylinder. They're pretty torquey, but they don't make much power. And so now this Chevy 4.3, they're about 200 horsepower. When he did it, he pulled all the fuel injection. It's got a Holley 390, I think it's called, little 4-barrel carb. So it's just got simple HEI, old school ignition, and a carburetor. So it's super simple. Really nothing to go wrong on it. You can fix it on the side road pretty easily. and runs good. And you know, I know a lot of younger people don't really understand carburetors or what the benefits are or whatever, but a properly set up carburetor runs really well. And with this rig, you know, with an old school simple rig, like I would rather drive an old school simple rig if I had to get from coast to coast across the country. I would rather drive something like this than a brand new Tacoma or something, because a new car breaks down, especially something that's really new. Who knows what's wrong with it? Like, they're so complicated now. Whereas something like this, you've got your little chip inside the distributor. So if distributor's got power and you don't have spark, there's a little module inside there that's like, I don't know, $10 or $20 to buy. Basically any auto parts store is gonna have it. And then carburetor, you know, fuel pump. Super basic, super easy. You got, literally, if you're going on a big trip, you could pack yourself a box with a handful of items and you're gonna get it on the road again. So that was kind of the reasoning behind pulling off the fuel injection, going to the 4-barrel. I know, like, an extreme off-road, fuel injection's better, but this thing really, honestly, this Jeep gets used more as almost like a farm implement than an off-roader. You know, he uses it for, you know, he had a good chunk of property before, and you know, he would use the winch for pulling logs, and you know, the lockers would get used just for dragging logs or, you know, stuff like that. Like, you know, he does take it out occasionally, but it really is more of a workhorse than a recreational deal. So it's pretty cool. This thing, I mean, this thing honestly has been overworked. It's pulled trailers with, I would say, 10,000 pounds on them, with either loads of rock or firewood. This Jeep has done stuff that's boggled my mind. But so it's pretty cool to do a little work on it for him. Keep this thing going. All right, so I'm digging into this thing. I am getting the old fan control wiring, and this is the old control unit. I'm not sure what brand this was, but I'm getting into that. This one used one of those little probes that pushes in. Here it is. That pushes into the fins of the radiator. And I don't know what went wrong, so we're just replacing all of it. So this is the new unit. I think I showed it before, but it's been a couple days between takes here. So this thing's pretty much self-contained. Under this little rubber cap, there's like a adjustable turn-on point for the fans. This one's pretty cool. It kind of does the fans. You know, this thing's got 2 fans here. So this controller's made for 2 fans, and it does like a staged setup to where it'll kick one fan on initially, you know, once you come to a certain temperature, and that's the adjustable point. And then if the temperatures continue to rise 15 degrees above your set point, the second fan will come on. So that way you don't have a huge shock to your electrical system. And also a huge, I don't know what you'd call that. I mean, also kind of a shock to the temperature of the water in the radiator. You don't want to like go crazy with the cooling, you know, have no fans, and then, you know, it's good to be kind of smooth with your temperatures control. So having the 2 fans so you can kind of ease into cooling the water down, because if you just like shock the water to cold, then you know, you can kind of run into like an oscillation with temperatures. So the first thing I did off camera is I set up the temperature probe. So like I showed, this one originally it had the push pin thing jammed in the fins of the radiator. This one uses a better setup that goes into the engine. The intake manifold, all the ports were already used up. We thought about pulling, there's a factory sensor down in here that we could have pulled out and put the probe there. But it wasn't, the length of the wiring was going to be tight, and then being right next to the exhaust I wasn't a big fan of for the wiring. So hopefully this works out great. So we ended up doing, of course you're not be able to see it, but we got this spacer. So that is that right there at the end of my finger. You see a hex and then a cylinder. That's the temperature probe. So we got this 1-inch thermostat spacer that, you kind of see it. There it is. You can see the spacer right here. So this is the thermostat neck and housing, and then this is the spacer. So that spacer, there's two 3/8 MPT ports in it, which is the size we needed. This is like from Summit, and so that way the probe is in the engine's coolant, water jacket, whatever, and it's right under the thermostat. So this is kind of like the important temperature zone as far as the controls of the cooling system. I think it's a lot better to have your fans activated by engine temperature versus the radiator temperature, but you know, everybody's got their own ideas. So like I said, I got that set up first because this kind of has a fixed length of wire. So I wanted to do the probe first, and then now I'm removing all of this original wiring so I can lay out the new stuff and get a good idea of where I'm going to mount that control unit. So hopefully it'll sit right. You can see these two screw holes. That's where the original little control unit sat. Hopefully I can put the new one right there as well, because it's kind of a nice little clean spot on the inner fender. And it's nice because it's pretty close to the battery. He's got some other accessories, and so we have, you know, this needs a key on ignition source, and this is a continuous duty solenoid, and he's got this wired up to power this fuse block for some accessories. And so it's nice and convenient. I've got a ignition source right here, and so I can hook up to that, and it's pretty close to the battery and close to the fans. And so that way the only wire of any major length is that probe, which will still be the length of the you know, original wire that they supplied. They say in the directions you can't extend this, but I really would rather not. So I am going to, I've got the original controller did both fans simultaneously, and so they're spliced together here. I've got to cut this heat shrink off and separate the two leads from the fans and basically rewire this, you know, with the two fans individually, power and ground for each, up to this area. So that's kind of a boring thing to watch, so I'm not going to film it. And once I get this stuff a little more arranged and set up, I'll come back and show you what I came up with. Okay, so the control unit's just not going to fit where the old one used to be mounted. It's just a little too big. So I decided to do is I'm going to unbolt this little fuse block and use these original two mounting holes, and then build a bracket that will slip underneath that fuse block and extend out and hold this guy kind of out in space out here. That way my temperature probe wire gives me a good amount of length with it sitting here. And then, you know, I'm real close to my power and my switched power, and you know, it's just a nice short reach for all the wiring. So I'm gonna draw something up in the computer real quick, and then I'm gonna cut it out of, I think I'm gonna use aluminum, just because I don't know if this guy gets warm at all. I'm sure it's like a solid state relay, so it might make some heat. So being mounted on a piece of aluminum would kind of act as a little more of a heat sink for it. And then I have some thin stick-on rubber sheeting I'm going to put on the bottom side of the aluminum bracket, basically right where it's going to sit on the steel sheet metal, because it's really not a great idea to sandwich aluminum onto steel. I mean, this has got paint on it, but it's old paint, so you can get some crazy corrosion between them, steel and aluminum, if you don't isolate it. So I'll put a piece of rubber in there, and then hopefully that'll kind of give it a little give too, as to not try to crack the holes out or anything. And then I will use these just have some small washers under them right now on the underside. But being it's going to have this weight hanging out here, I'm going to do some heavy fender washers, and then I'll coat those in rubber as well on the underside. So I'm going to go draw that up. I've got a sketch done up already with all the dimensions. And so I'm going to go draw that up, and then we'll get that cut out and get this thing mounted. Okay, so here's my chicken scratch drawing. This is usually what I do, is I'll just do a quickie shape with no real scale or anything by hand, and then use calipers and get the good dimensions. And then that's what I came up with. So here's the bracket all cut out. I put these 3 holes just for airflow underneath that unit in case it needs it. And again, I'm just gonna unbolt that circuit breaker or that fuse box, and this will slip underneath and use the existing hardware, and then be able to hold this guy. Like I said, I'm going to put a piece of rubber in between the steel and the aluminum, and then get this guy bolted in place. All right, there's that rubber cushion I was talking about. I think it's about 1/8 inch thick. Yeah, it's about the same as the material. I buy sheets of this stuff from McMaster Car. Super convenient. It's self-adhesive. It's pretty soft. Works good for cushioning and stuff like that. So that's going to sit against there. I'm going to get this pulled apart and this sandwiched in its place, and then get this thing bolted up. All right, so I got it mounted. I've got just temporary hardware in it because I've got to go to the store and get some hardware for a couple things, so I'm waiting till the end so I know what to buy, get it all at once. So what I wanted to mention is my terminals. I only use these terminals that have the built-in heat shrink, and then the heat shrink also has like hot glue inside, so it acts, I mean, it weatherproofs this connection and also acts as a strain relief for the wire, so it keeps the wire from being yanked out as easily. I try to lay my wires out as short and as clean. And something you can do too with these guys is, while it's still hot from shrinking it, you can kind of flex it and hold it if you want it to have some shape once it dries up and hardens. And then so like this is the kit, and it comes with these crappy style. I do use these sometimes, but I'll take a pair of needle nose pliers and yank this plastic off, and then crimp these in place and use heat shrink tubing. It also came with a couple of these guys. These are generally called Scotch locks, and pretty much the only place I ever put these is right there. Garbage. So I'm down to making a couple connections. Once I'm finished up, I will come back, and I basically got to do the main power. I got to find some place to mount the circuit breaker, and then I've got to reconnect, extend and reconnect the fan wire. I'm really thinking about getting a connector, so these can be a quick disconnect in case this has to be pulled apart. I gotta dig through my stuff and see if I have something or not. I may have to go buy something for that. So I will come back when I got some meaningful progress and show you what I came up with. Okay, so I'm still just plugging away at this. So I guess last I showed I had that all mounted, and now I'm hooking up the main power. which was this big red wire. You know, they supplied it pretty short, so I had a butt connect, extend it out. I'm gonna loom all this. I'm just getting it kind of the lengths figured out and ran. So I'm following this other trunk of wire that already exists here. So I made this little bracket. It sandwiches in between this core support rod and this tab on the firewall. And that's where I'm mounting the circuit breaker. So this kit came with the circuit breaker. This little guy here, it's a 50 amp. It's important on these, they are specific as to which wire goes to the battery and which one goes to your output. But something that's really important that I don't hear enough people talk about is where to mount fuses or circuit breakers. And the best way to explain it is as close to your source of power as possible. Because, so this is going to be my wire that goes from the battery to the circuit breaker. This piece of wire is unprotected. So if this were to get, you know, pinched in the hood or whatever, something were to cut this insulation that was grounded, this would short out. And so the shorter this wire is, the better. You know, let's just say you were to plug a wire in to the battery here and run it over and then put your circuit breaker in here. Well, this whole stretch of wire is unprotected. And so if it were to short out, you know, it basically turns red hot and catches things on fire. So you want your disconnect, which is your fuse, your circuit breaker, as close as possible to your source of power. So that's what I'm doing. Another thing I like to do is these little circuit breakers, they come in this little like sheet metal can. I like to point them down like that as much as possible. That way if water, it's not going to try to fill with water. And then these posts, which will be hot, are pointing down and not, you know, they're less likely to get hit by a wrench or, you know, something if you're working on your car. Something I like to do is when I'm done is I'll take vacuum caps and slide them on these studs, so then they're protected and isolated too. And another thing, like I got this wire made up, I got to heat shrink the ends, but I'm not going to hook this up until absolutely last. That way the rest of the system is dead until I'm completely ready. So I have basically a auxiliary, or not auxiliary, like a backup switch, an override switch wire to hook up. This Jeep already has a switch on the dash for that, so I've just got to track down that wire and hook this up. And that's so it basically bypasses the temperature probe and just turns the fans on directly. So I gotta hook that up, and I gotta hook that up and then basically extend these wires to the fans, and then this project's done. So I'm gonna get on that, and I'll come back when that's done. And then once I'm finished with that, I'm onto the rear shocks. I'm gonna pull these shocks off and do some valving work to them. All right, so I got the radiator fans done. So now I'm under here, pulling off these rear shocks. These are FOA 2-inch reservoir shocks. I think they're 8-inch stroke. And they've been fitted with urethane bushings instead of the uniballs, so they fit on these factory Jeep like stud mounts. Actually, these are aftermarket skid plates, but it's similar style. And the same thing up top there. So I'm getting the hardware pulled loose. I'll probably jack up the rig, get the suspension in full droop. It'll make the shocks a little easier to pull off. And then get these things pulled apart and see what's inside and figure out what kind of change I want to make. All right, so I got one of the shocks apart. Actually, it's the second one. Got the shaft and the seal head and everything pulled out. So here's the piston. This little hole here is the one original free bleed. and I end up adding 2 more. These shocks, I don't know exactly how they were ordered, what boxes were clicked or whatever when they were ordered, but they have basically a shim stack, a 10,000th shim stack, sorry, and the compression side's got a flutter stack. So I'm leaving all that alone because, again, this is pretty darn similar to the Samurai that I redid a while back. We had this Jeep out in the dunes a while back, and it takes the big hits really good, but it's just like the initial sharp edge of things that was kind of harsh. And in my experience, this really helps out on that. Opening up the free bleed just kind of takes the edge off and doesn't really affect the shock's ability to absorb the big hits. Because these free bleeds let the piston move through the oil, kind of at a low speed easily, but the flow capacity is very easily overwhelmed by these 3 ports on the big hits, and then the shim stack, comes into play. So I've had pretty good luck doing it this way. Again, this isn't a one-size-fits-all fix. If the suspension, was not moving on the big hits, then I would definitely change out the thickness on the shim stack. But the way this was working, I think this is going to be a good fix. And in reality, this Jeep is basically street driven. He plays with it every once in a while. But still, like on speed bumps and potholes, sharp edged bumps, it was pretty harsh. So I think based on this and what I've done in the past, I think this should work out pretty good. One thing I noticed with these, because it's got these clamps, I kind of feel like it's squeezing the tube a little bit, and it's making it hard for the floater piston to move. So I raised the fluid level on the cylinder or the reservoir about 1 inch to try to keep the floater piston away from this clamp area. Because if this thing can't move easily, that can cause cavitation issues. And this oil was was kind of foamed up more than I'm used to seeing. You can kind of still see that, it's still kind of hazy. So I'm letting it sit for a while and really kind of settle. And then, like I said, I added a little more oil to try to get that piston above this clamp area. And that's plenty safe on these shocks because they're only 8-inch travel shocks, and the reservoirs are the same length as what would be on, I think basically all of these guys' shocks, they use the same length reservoir. So there's plenty of volume for that extra inch oil. It's kind of a common misconception that people see reservoir shocks and they think it's all about fluid capacity and cooling, and it's really not. It's about nitrogen capacity. When the shocks are fully extended, there's typically only a little bit of oil, 1 inch or 2 of oil in most shocks, and it's all nitrogen. And the idea is you want to be squeezing your nitrogen volume as a percentage as little as you can. That way the pressure stays more consistent. Because if you have, like, say, this much oil and you squeeze your nitrogen down into a smaller area, the pressure is really going to go up, and that you'll feel that in the ride quality. And it's hard on everything. The higher the pressure, the harder it is on all the seals, and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I'm gonna get these threads I'm gonna shoot them with some brake clean, get the oil off, and same thing with the nut. Loctite, and put this thing all back together. One more thing I wanted to point out and show that I did is if you compare the surface finish, it's kind of hard to tell, but this outer surface is where the largest diameter shim seals. And on the compression side, I held a good straight edge across these 4 surfaces against the light, and you can see a little air gap in the center circle. And so what that means is when this is tightened, it's going to put a little bit of preload on that sealing shim. And so, you know, if you were to dyno this or whatever, I mean, a lot of it's based on the free bleeds, but Bill Stein will talk about digressive valving a lot. And what that is basically a higher low speed. So like cornering, brake dive, squat, when you accelerate, stuff like that, they'll have a little higher damping for forces like that, and then the valves will blow open for harder impacts. And in some cases that's good. In off-road, generally that's not, because that'll basically highlight the edge of all the bumps, because you've got kind of like a breakaway pressure you've got to reach before the shim stack's open. And I'm not a fan of digressive valving. Again, I'm not a huge, expert on this stuff, but just in the stuff I've done, and like my wife's car, she's got a Toyota 4Runner, a newer one, and I put Bilstein 5100s on it, and they definitely improved the handling and stuff of the car, but you do notice that kind of highlighted edge of the bumps you feel. It quickly, it's not awful, but for off-road stuff, it's really not ideal. And I think they do it as a band-aid for the overly soft springs that the 4Runners have, because it definitely does corner better and stuff, but and feel more sporty. But in the rear of an old Jeep, you definitely don't want that, because it's going to make it feel bucky and harsh in the back. So, like, I don't know that that was an intentional design or maybe just a tiny flaw, because it looked like it was only, 5/1000 of an inch or something. Not much, but still, I have some precision files that are real wide, and I just really carefully went all the way around this and kind of took that off, made these flush. I think that's going to help on the ride too. So, I wish there was some sort of way to quantify the ride, to kind of portray this on video. Unfortunately, it's all seat of the pants. But like I said, this is a very similar situation to that Samurai that I covered in a video, and just doing these free bleeds was just night and day difference. Just the potholes and cross grain stuff, like going through intersections where the roads are rutted out and things like that, driveways, speed bumps. This makes a huge difference and really doesn't sacrifice its ability to hit and absorb big bumps without blowing through the travel and bottoming out. So I'm going to get this put back together, and I'll come back with the next step. All right, so I've got both the shocks back together, and something I do is I'll charge them with just air from the air compressor and lay out a couple fresh paper towels and let the shocks sit at least for a couple hours, just to test for leaks. And with the brand new paper towel, one little drop will really show that there's a leak. So these ones, I end up letting them sit overnight just because it's kind of late when I got the last one put together. And so now I let the air out, push the shaft all the way in, and then hook this up. This is the nitrogen. So these little fittings, they screw onto the Schrader valve, and then this guy turns in and pushes the little pin in the center to open the valve. And then, so they call this like a no loss chuck. And so then once this is filled, then you back this up to close the valve. And then when you take this all loose, you don't lose any pressure. Because even like if you had like an air style, which some people use with the nitrogen, you'll fill it and just a little psh you get when you take this off, you'll actually lose some pressure a tiny bit out of here. So this is a more accurate setup. So I have kind of a homemade filler setup here. My dad actually made this years ago for some sort of hydraulic accumulator thing. I don't know, I don't remember exactly. But he's retired, so I've acquired a lot of his old tools, which is pretty sweet. So this setup, you turn on the tank. This valve I basically never touch. Right now this one's closed. So, this one's showing tank pressure, which is what, a couple hundred pounds. It's getting low. But even at a couple hundred pounds, this could probably still fill 50 shocks. And so right now, so with this closed and this open, this valve open, this is showing the pressure in the shock. I'm not sure if it's important, but you see most people compress the shock as they're filling it. And I think that's, I don't know that it really does anything other than if it doesn't come out, then it shows you have maybe a binding issue or something in the shock. So what I'm doing, I'm shooting for 150 pounds in these. That's kind of the minimum. But since these are going in the back of a Jeep, high pressure can affect the ride as well. Because you end up, it's what they call like a nose pressure. So if you got 150 PSI in here, the surface area of the end of the rod, that pressure times that surface area is how much force these shocks are pushing out. And for the wheel to go up, you've got to overcome that pressure to get it to even start moving. So the higher that is, it's kind of like an initial braking pressure you've got to reach for the shocks to move. And so being at this Jeep road kind of rough, I want to be on the minimum side of this. Because really, this isn't like a high performance off-road rig. It's not desert racing or anything like that. It's mostly just for street use. So, this whole thing, I'm shooting for ride quality. So basically with this system, you got to be more careful, because if I just crack this open and let it go, this would just go to tank pressure and fill this to whatever's in the tank. So basically this is a real, they call it a needle valve. It's a real fine. So you just crack it, shut it off, and there it is. You see this extended out on its own. So usually these the FOA shocks, they must use cheap Schrader valves. I do have issues with these not sealing great on them. I usually gotta cinch them down a couple times. So you can see that did drop a little bit. So I've got to be kind of quick on shutting the Schrader. So I'll go like one line above and then back this guy off quickly. And that's basically it. So now shut that off. Shut this off, and you can see it's at 150. And now crack this off, and it's done. So now that gas leaking is just what's in between this valve and this valve. So it's just basically what's in the hose. So that's basically it. Get these put back on the Jeep, and this project will be done. So once I get these on, I'm going to take it for a quick little spin and see how it feels. And luckily, I've got a pretty good test. Just the base of my driveway leading up to the shop door, it's got about a, there's the street and then some gravel and then a concrete driveway. And the gravel is kind of sloughed away over time because it's on a decent hill. So I got about a 2-inch step onto that concrete, and pulling the Jeep onto that, I mean, you really feel it the back, like. So it's a pretty good test. Just going up and down the driveway, you can tell what kind of a difference it made. So, all right, well, I'm gonna get the Jeep pulled in and get these stuck on, and then take it for a spin. Okay, well, I just got done on a test drive, and the ride is vastly better. So right now I'm just, I picked up some wire loom, so I'm just finishing looming off some of the wires to the fan controller, and that basically wraps this up. Thing hopefully should be good to go for a while. I was kind of concerned about the front shocks feeling too stiff, but it feels good and balanced. Pretty happy with it. I'm gonna let him drive it around for a while and see what he thinks, and then if he wants to make further changes, then that's what we'll do. So that basically wraps up this project, and thanks for watching.